Now, I will introduce today's speakers, the HGSE Carl H. Pforzheimer Jr. Professor of Teaching and Learning, Richard J. Light, Ph.D. 69, and Allison Jegla, Ed.M. 20, Global Director of Impact at 100 Women in Finance. Together, they have engaged in co-authoring the book, Becoming Great Universities, which is why you're all here today, so thank you. This book highlights 10 core challenges that all colleges and universities face and offers practical steps that everyone on campus, from presidents to first-year undergraduates, can take to enhance student life and learning. Whether you've read the book or not yet had the opportunity, I'm certain that you will walk away from today's session with some next steps for your own life and research, and learn much from this duo and their work. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dick and Allison.
This is wonderful. I hope everyone can hear me loud and clear. Oh, this is good. Okay, I see a very nice picture of Allison and myself and a few other people on the top. Emily, quick question for you. Is it everything loud and clear?
You're doing great.
Okay, great. So let me share, first of all, we're delighted to be here. We're well prepared and we're looking forward to a productive and an enjoyable hour together. I'm obviously Dick Light, and Allison, my wonderful colleague, is sitting right here. Not actually, when I say sitting right here, I'm 2 miles from Harvard Square. Allison, where are you sitting? You can speak for yourself. You have to unmute, but speak for yourself. Unmute. Can you do it? Emily, can we unmute Allison?
There we go. Thanks, Emily. Okay. I was like,
Where
oh,
are
no,
you
I'm a participant. I'm in Mexico City, so not quite close to you, but near in spirit.
You're just 2,600 miles away. No big deal.
Biggie.
Okay. Anyway, let me share very quickly. We've made a plan, as I said, to try to make this both productive, but also some fun and interesting. So we decided, rather than each of us giving a lecture about some of our points, which on Zoom doesn't always work that well, it'd be much more fun, much more substantive and productive to just have the two of us as co-authors go back and forth with a series of questions for each other about our book. Obviously, we have had many conversations now over a couple of years, and so you will quickly see for yourself what we have in mind. But please do think of questions that you may want to pose to Allison, or to me, or to both of us, and send them in to Emily, and we'll wrap up 15 minutes before, before 1:15, and hopefully get to most or many of your questions. So we will go back and forth. Let's get started. Allison, would you like to begin? Ask me anything you want, and then I'm going to ask you. And if we stump each other, so the people will see the truth. Go ahead.
There we go. I love a challenge. Let's do it. I think let's start with an easy one. So, this is a Zoom meeting. Participants can see us, and from first glance, we superficially seem to be quite dissimilar, you could say. So how did you, a senior Harvard professor, come to work with me, a then master's student at HGSE?
Allison, is that your nice way of saying I'm old enough to be your grandpa? Okay,
you said it.
yes.
I didn't. You've been always the one to say that, not me.
No, this is very good. It's a question that Allison and I laughed about together as we were working. This book was written, 90% long distance, where, Allison was sitting in Mexico City or London or Michigan, and I'm sitting at home right near Harvard Square. So here goes. We are an unlikely pair of co-authors, and it's probably worth investing a moment or two up front sharing this. For those of you familiar with the higher education program, higher education group at HGSE, Judy McLaughlin, longtime chair of that group, I mean for like 25 or more years, until a few years ago, she matched advisors and advisees based on common interests. So she matched in the fall of 2019, 3 years ago, exactly 3 years ago, she matched Allison with me to be my advisee. And we met and we talked, and we immediately found, number one, we had the same alma mater, the University of Pennsylvania. I asked Allison, did you like it? She said, I got off to a rough start, but I loved it. They really were invested in my success. And I said, I had the exact same experience, 50 years earlier, but I had the same experience. Anyway, so we had that. We shared the struggles when first arriving, and so on. So as we talked, we realized that we had our age difference notwithstanding, we had a lot of interests in common. And at one point, I think Allison may have said, if you have something that you've drafted for your next written piece, I'd be happy to take a look. I'm a good editor. And I'm thinking, I'm always looking for good editors. So I showed Allison something. Well, she not only improved the writing, but she contributed about 7 new ideas. I mean, things I hadn't thought of. And I'm thinking, this is good. So to make a long story short, that happened about 6 times in a row. At which point I simply said, Allison, want to be my co-author on a book I'm writing? And she said, yes, and she can speak for herself now. But the point just being, that's how we became co-authors, and we basically wrote the book remotely. So it was an experience, it was fun, and that's it. Should I now ask you a question?
Go for it. Yeah, that was
ready. Okay, okay, here goes. My question is, I think I would ask almost any author of a book the sort of big overarching question. Briefly, in a nutshell, what are the 1 or 2 overarching themes of the book that you just wrote? That we just wrote?
Yeah. I think one of the first things that we really emphasize throughout the book is that, dollars don't necessarily translate to greatness. We're coming from this obviously very well-resourced institution, both Penn and Harvard. And we have a lot of fondness for both of those schools. But I think what we tried to emphasize in this book was that the things we were suggesting weren't necessarily things that only Penn or only Harvard could do. Yeah, sure, they may have been tried there, but they were also tried at a variety of other different institutions, ranging from very well-resourced to not as well-resourced. And I think that's really something we tried to drive home because, people rightly so could say to us, you're coming from Harvard, you have all the resources in the world, but what if we're at this other sort of place? And so we really tried to make everything very accessible and easily, be able to be easily implemented without necessarily requiring tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. Kind of on that same point, I think another core theme of ours is that innovation and change doesn't necessarily have to be a 5-year, 150-page strategic plan. It really can start with grassroots. One professor or a handful of professors can decide to try something new in their teaching, or a student could bring a new idea to one of the staff members, or somebody could announce some innovation challenge or something to that effect. But it really is more so about getting at the culture of a campus and the willingness to try new things and to fail sometimes and to try again and to keep continuing on that cycle. That's really where we differentiated the schools that end up being really great and delivering value for students versus those that maybe aren't quite there yet. And then I think another core piece of our book is that, obviously we all know campuses are changing. The definition of a college environment is changing, and we really focused in our book on the residential experience because I think that's important to both of us. But kind of going a step further within that is having the personal relationships, having you as a student entering onto a campus, leaving in 4 years or however long it takes to graduate, and saying, I know people on this campus and I know that people care about me and they were looking out for me along the way. That's something that is really hard to replicate, in my opinion, in a virtual setting. It's really about going to office hours and having those student group meetings and speaking with people and, running into your hall mates as you're headed to class. Those things are really, really special. And as we continue to evolve what a college looks like, I think that's something that we really wanted to reinforce, how to develop those personal relationships and really capitalize on having people together who are coming from all different areas of the world, all different backgrounds. There's something really special about that is hard. It's hard to imagine another scenario in life in which that happens, where you get people who have all chosen this place, but for very different reasons. They're studying very different things, but they're kind of all, commingled and able to have those interactions. So those are what I would just call out quickly as some of the key themes in our book. We touch on several other things too that kind of transcend the different chapters, but is there anything else you would add to that, Dick?
No, that's a great summary. And ask me the hardest question you can think of.
I don't know if we're there yet, but let me do some thinking. So one of our chapters is about how, when an undergraduate comes to campus, they're kind of focused in on themselves, right? That's just kind of human nature. You're thinking about how you will be impacted by that school, how you will grow and change. But we really kind of talked about how that individual student can also impact the others on their campus and enrich the experience for everyone. Could you say a few more words about that and maybe give a real world example of how students actually did come to change something at a campus and create something of value for others?
Yeah, I'm going to pick up. Thank you, Allison. One of the big deal themes that the two of us as co-authors, we just talked and talked and talked. We must have had 20 Zoom conversations on this point about the importance of how a campus culture really can impact the creativity, not just of faculty and staff and deans and so on, but of individual students, even, a first-year student, I'll use the outdated term, a freshman, a brand new kid, who just arrives on campus can actually make a difference. And I am always struck because before the pandemic, before COVID, I would try to visit one campus a month. And I did that for about 20 years. So a simple bit of arithmetic, roughly 10 months a year, because the campuses are not, up and running in July, most of them. One campus a month times 20 years, times 12 months a year, that's 240 campuses. That's a lot of campuses. The single most frequent question I got when I visited, often at the invitation of one of the campus leaders, a dean or a president or a provost or some such person, the most common question that I got was, how do we become stronger because we don't have Harvard's resources? We're not rich. Harvard's rich. We're not. And that's a fair question. And I would never, ever, make fun of someone for posing that good question. Just about every single question, every single suggestion that Allison and I came up with or wrote about in our book called Becoming Great Universities, it costs nothing. I don't mean it costs a small amount. I mean literally zero. Here's an example, since Allison invited a real example. Here's a real example. I'm going to use, it's Harvard, and everyone here logged on right this minute is from Harvard or was from Harvard. So I'll use Harvard. True story. A few years ago, 4 undergraduates were sitting around, I think it was Pforzheimer house, but anyway, one of the houses. They were upperclassmen, and they were bemoaning what the situation was in terms of getting to hear from more faculty. They duly noted every student comes to almost any college or university, not just Harvard. They take typically 4 courses each semester times 8 semesters. 4 times 8 equals 32. They take 32 courses. That means they're exposed to 32 professors. They hear ideas and suggestions and insights from 32 professors, plus or minus, but that's the general ballpark. Well, Harvard has 1,000 professors, and Ohio State has 4,000, and Bowdoin has 300. So 32 is a small fraction. So the students went to a dean, and they just said, we would like to start a new program at Harvard College, and it will cost you nothing. And the dean said, what is it? And the students said, we want to call it 10 big ideas, 10 great professors, 10 minutes each. And the dean said, I think I get it. You're going to ask each of 10 professors to talk for less than 10 minutes and present a big idea, to which the 4 students said, bingo, and we will do all the work. We'll line up all the students. I'm sorry, we'll line up all the faculty. We'll choose 10 to invite. No money changes hands. It's just simply, we'd like to think a professor would be happy to come for 10 minutes. The dean said, what do you need from me? I think it sounds great. The student said, could you reserve Sanders Theater, seating close to 1,000? And the dean said, for one night in the middle of winter, in the dead of winter in February, I'll reserve it. And she did. And so the students did the publicity. The students reached out and chose 10 professors to invite. All 10 accepted. They were honored. I could give you lists of names. That's not the point now. The point just is, it was the students who took the initiative. It was the students who took the work. They put flyers on bulletin boards all over campus. The cold night in February arrived. No one had a clue how many students would show up. 900 students. The line snaked around the building, Sanders Theater. Standing applause, standing ovation for every professor. It has now become a campus tradition. What's the point? How much did that cost the controller, the line item, accountant for Harvard? The answer is zero. A university with hardly any resources could do it. There are, by the way, some other universities now, places like Tennessee State, as well as Penn, that now have adopted that idea. My big takeaway, and Allison and I have developed this carefully, is culture goes a long way. Okay, I should stop there. Now I'm going to ask you a question. Allison, as you know, because we talked about it 16 times online, Harvard Magazine in the August 2022 issue, and most recent issue, ran a long excerpt from our book. I thought it was very generous and gracious of them to do it. And from the dozen chapters, they chose to print about half of our chapter called Investing and Harvesting. Every college and university in America faces this challenge of investing versus harvesting. So Allison, could you explain what do those two words mean? Because we kind of made them up. What do the two words mean? And can you give an example of the value of capitalizing on those two words?
Absolutely. Yes. So this is something that you brought in terms of these two words. And I thought it was just such a beautiful way to explain kind of the student experience, kind of starting out with investing. So when you get to a campus, naturally you're excited. I don't care whether you're a first year undergraduate, you're a first year master's student, PhD student, you're excited to take advantage of what the campus has to offer. So you're getting to that place, and I think there's a real tendency and draw to trying all the new things. So I remember getting to Penn and thinking, I grabbed flyers during the activities fair for like the sailing team and the rowing team and like French club or something. I don't speak French, I don't know. But you just wanted to learn all this newness. There's so many resources at these campuses, especially if you're coming from high school that maybe didn't have as many opportunities. And it's just so incredible to get to take advantage of all of those things. And I think there's a real tendency for students to do that. And so that's kind of what we are defining as investing. You're investing your time to try something new. Maybe you join the debate team, you've never debated before, but you're investing your time to try to see if that's something you might want to pursue even more. Harvesting, on the other hand, is when you're coming into a new situation and you've already you've taken the time to build skills in your past. So maybe you've been on the debate team in high school for a couple of years and you want to continue to do that in college. That's kind of the difference between the two. And I think really what we're getting at in that chapter of the book is that there's, I think it's quite common for students to come in and focus only on investing because they really want to take advantage of what that college has to offer. Well, we really encourage students to also think about harvesting. You've done all these things, you've invested that time back then, now harvest the fruits of all that work. And I think for students who are coming into maybe a city for the first time, or you're traveling somewhere to attend university and everything else in your life is new, there's a real benefit to keeping that core piece of how you've defined yourself so far. So as an example, when I got to Penn, I did that, right? Like I was investing like crazy. I had all these different things I was trying, and I felt really lost, to be honest. Like you mentioned at the beginning, Dick, wasn't thriving, to say the least, the first semester of college, certainly. And it kind of took a prompt from one of the upperclassmen to say, okay, she sat me down, we looked at my schedule. And for one thing, I wasn't even using Google Calendar, which was my first mistake. That I don't know what I was doing. I was like keeping things down on paper, and it was just, things moved too fast in college to do that. But she sat me down, she helped me put everything on a calendar. And she said, okay, what of these things are brand new to you? And it was pretty much everything, to be honest. And she said, you need to carve out time to take care of who you are, like who you have been up to this point. You're 18 years old, you've spent all this time. And so I said, okay, I'm not doing anything athletic. And that's always been a huge part of who I am. I've always been a 3-sport athlete. I've always done things, you know, I've gotten outside, I've gone for runs, like that's just who I am. But I hadn't done any of that my first semester. And so I looked at my calendar and said, okay, I'm going to go join the intramural basketball team. I played basketball after high school. And there was really something special about coming into that environment. It was still a new thing. I was still among new people. It was a new gym, but there was a real familiarity to it that honestly really helped the rest of the experience. So that's something that I think we really wanted to show to students, but then also to the advisor or to that upperclassman, you know, generous friend who might be able to advise a new student about how to think about those things. So I think you would also ask, Dick, you know, why is this important? And just as a fun kind of anecdote, I have a good friend who I used to work with, and she, not in a professional sense, we run a nonprofit together, which you'll understand that in a minute. But her name is Maya. She had gone to Princeton for undergrad, studied art history, went to Columbia for her master's, was doing art history, started working at an art gallery. So she's invested all this time in art, right? And she gets to this art gallery and she's like, you know what I don't think I love? Art history. So she had taken all this time, she had, you know, really invested, and she thought to herself, I need to pivot. So she went and did a post-bac pre-med at Johns Hopkins, got her MD at University of Michigan Medical School, became a resident there, and now she's a dermatologist. She's been practicing for several years. She told me that whole, you know, how things had progressed for her in her career. And I said, well, you know, kind of an indelicate question, but like, do you regret that you've kind of wasted all this time, right? Like, art, dermatology does not seem all that related. And she said, you know what? No, I use it every day. Like, I use my art degree every day in my work because dermatology is about identifying patterns. And that had never occurred to me. But because she had invested this time in learning art history, and then she was now able to harvest it in her work in dermatology. So I thought that was just a really nice way to kind of reinforce why that's important, kind of trying new things, but also continuing the things that you already know you're good at. She's really fantastic too, so that helps.
This is great. I just want to quickly add a thought to Allison's very, very crisp answer. And that's to say, in a little bit of research that's been published, not by me or by Allison or by me, by several other people, it turns out that getting the balance right between investing and harvesting on many campuses. There was a study done at Brown. There was a study done at the University of Texas. There was a study done at Duke. Basically, students, in their own words, they just say, if I can just try a few new things, but keep hold of the things I'm good at and not lose them, that makes for the most fulfilling experience. And, you know, that's a challenge for every student. Okay, let's see, Allison, why don't you ask me the next one? I hit
Sure.
you.
So as we probably all know, student demographics around the United States are changing, in some cases substantially. Can you talk a bit about our chapter that offers suggestions to a college or university about how leaders can help students come to campus who may be unprepared to really start out and thrive from day one, much like you and I both were when we started?
Right, we are living examples of underprepared students. Allison, are you a first generation in your family student?
Yeah, so I'm from a really small town in Michigan. I honestly think there may be more cows than people in the town. And yeah, I mean, I really hadn't seen a lot of different professional roles represented. My parents didn't go to college, but they were very passionate about education and making sure that I got that. So had a lot of support, but no role modeling in that sense.
Yeah. The reason I asked Allison that question, of course, I knew the answer, but there's a point. I bet many of you folks may or may not know this. If you ask, what is the single fastest growing subgroup of students on almost every good or outstanding campus, sort of America's top 100 campuses, the fastest growing subgroup with no close second or third, it's first generation in their family students. As recently as 10 years ago, Harvard had 6% of the first year class were the first generation in their family to attend college, and Harvard no less. Now, this year, starting like this week, 20% of the first year of Harvard students are first-gen students. That's amazing. You know, Stanford is 20%, Dartmouth is 18%, Wellesley is 21%, the list goes on. So anyway, you get the idea. That's the fastest growing group. So then the question is, how do you help those young folks full of goodwill, but maybe not quite so well prepared to succeed in every way on campus? And that may require some changes in advising, and I just want to offer a few suggestions. If I were the czar of any campus, no one has invited me recently to be czar of Harvard or any other campus, but if I were, I would make a few suggestions to every student. I would literally take them almost by the scruff of the neck and just say, here are a few things you may want to think about. You know, I have no doubt you're smart. Consider these things to make the most of every opportunity here at this wonderful and fairly demanding campus college. The first is get to know, make an effort, be proactive. It may take screwing up your courage a little bit. Try to get to know one faculty member, at least a little bit, every semester, and have that faculty member get to know you at least a little. And then I actually tell that to my advisees. I have a handful of undergraduate advisees. I just sort of volunteer to have them. And I tell them, just think, even if you fail and you only succeed half the time you succeed, well, you're going to be here 8 semesters. By senior year, you're going to have 3 or 4 faculty who know you. They can write a recommendation, if you wish, for graduate school. They can serve as job references. But most important of all, those are the people who will really help you engage with being a student at, I could say Harvard, but I could say Wellesley, or I could say Mississippi State. It applies basically everywhere. Now, a second substantive research finding, I'll just assert it, and please believe me, I'm not making this stuff up. The value of taking just one small class. And we could argue about what small is. I'm going to arbitrarily say enrollment under 20. Somebody else might say, oh no, it should be 14. Whatever you think. One small class each semester. It's incalculable. Why? Because that's one way to get to know a faculty member. If there are only 15 of you in the classroom, how can the professor not get to know everybody at least a little? And everybody gets to know the professor. And as a young woman I talked to recently said, I did not especially like about 7 or 8 of the students in my small class, but that meant the other half became good friends. So I had 7 good friends. And by the end of my first semester of my first year, I had 7 good friends. We were discussing rooming together, living together, blocking together. And so I share this simply as a concrete example, small class. Next, speak up in class. I think it's so sad when I get students, and I'm going to be very blunt, there are students who come to HGSE from very large, mostly public universities. I'm not angry at public universities, but there's a challenge. And the challenge is I'll ask the student, did you take many small classes? This is the new HGSE student, my advisee, just like Allison. And I'll just say, did you take many small classes when you went to X state university? And I remember one student went to a very famous public university on the West Coast, and it was a young woman. And she said to me with a straight face, oh, I took plenty of small classes. Yeah, why do you ask? And I just said, oh, because it's a good thing. And what do you mean by small, I asked. She said, well, I remember one class had only 55. And I remember asking her, did you speak up? And she said, no, I sat behind the pole so I wouldn't have to talk. So anyway, you get the idea. I'm sure I think our colleagues here do get the idea. So the idea basically just is engage as fully as you can. And I'll conclude with a real example that Harvard developed, and I think it's a great invention. Many other places have picked it up. A group of students, even before classes start, so this is like late August in first year, meaning next week. We're now in late August, meaning next week, a group of students will be invited to come to a room, come to Seaver, room 102 in Harvard Yard, and 80 students. It's all voluntary. There's no academic credit. They show up, and they're all given a copy of last year's history exam taken by first-year students. I don't know, US history, world history, Latin American history, Asian history, whatever it may be. And the idea just is they're given a copy of the exam and they're told, read the exam, and they do. They're all sitting in their chairs. Then the woman in front, who's the professor of history, says, with Doris's permission, there really is a Doris, with Doris's permission, I'm going to distribute her answers to my final exam last year. And she distributes photocopies of Doris's answers. And the professor says, I want you all, I'll be quiet for 4 minutes, read what Doris wrote, read her answers. Students are gobbling this up, they haven't even started classes yet. Then the professor says, now what I want you to do is grade, pretend you're me, you're the professor, grade each of Doris's 5 short essay answers to the questions. Just give it a grade like A- or B- or C+ or A+ or whatever you want. Grade it and write a sentence or two about why you're giving it the grade. And the students do it. And then the professor, after standing quietly, she says, all right, now, and then she distributes the final step. The professor distributes the actual grades and comments that Doris got for each of her 5 answers. And the professor says, I want you to compare what you graded the responses on my final exam last year, the real exam, with what I was looking for. See if we're on the same page. And she said, after a few minutes, there was buzz, everybody was into it. And the professor simply said, raise your hand if you were close, roughly, to what I was expecting. And about half the students raised their hands. I'm sitting in the back just watching. And she said, raise your hand if we're on totally different pages. The other half raised their hand. And then she said, I want to hear from someone who's on a different page. Why were you on a different page? The single most common answer was, the student says, I realized I parroted back the answer that I read in the textbook. But that's not what you wanted. You wanted my analysis. I was giving the high school answer to a Harvard College serious, challenging question. I need to learn how to take an exam thoughtfully. The students on the way out were asked to rate the experience 1 to 10. I forget the exact rating, but as you know, 9 point something. So there's my specific example about making simple accommodations to help students from under-resourced high schools. They're all very smart. That's why they're admitted. But how do you help them to succeed? All right, Allison, I've been talking a long time. Let me hit you now. We had many conversations about thinking globally. I have yet to meet, I know Larry Bacow, the president of Harvard, very well for a long time. He loves talking about teaching Harvard students to think globally, not just locally or regionally, think about the wide world. So, Allison, this is something I know you've thought a lot about and we wrote about. Any thoughts about how colleges and universities can do a good job thinking about that?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of 2 ways to think about it. One is students who have global perspectives, who are on campus. How do we get those students to, like we were talking about earlier, kind of enrich the experience for the rest of the students on campus? And the other piece of it is when students potentially leave a campus to have a global experience, how to facilitate that. So I'll start with the former. A lot of schools are really fortunate to have a large population of international students or those who have had, interesting international experiences as part of their student body. So as we talked about in the book, ways to capitalize on that experience. One example could be, let's say you're in a comparative healthcare class and you're looking at Germany versus the UK versus Finland, trying to look at their different healthcare systems, pros, cons, how are they different, how are they the same? So maybe there's a student from each of those countries, inviting them to share obviously with permission, inviting them to share their experiences, maybe from a firsthand perspective, can really help shed light on what the actual lived experience is in those places. So kind of incorporating those perspectives whenever possible. Obviously, though, some schools don't have a large population of international students or don't have, students who have traveled a great deal. So one of the things we talked a lot about in the book is kind of this tendency for students to gravitate towards study abroad, which is awesome. And for students who've really thought critically about that and the place that it would fill in their lives, that's great. Go do it. Go have a great experience. But I think we really focused in a lot on helping students make those informed, intentional choices about how they choose to get those global experiences. So for example, perhaps it's not a study abroad for a whole semester because the student is a club president and they're, running for this or running for that, or they're doing an internship throughout the school year. Maybe for that student, it doesn't make sense to do a study abroad program. Maybe it would put them behind where they would want to be based on what their goals are for their college experience. Maybe in that case, the student could do a summer study abroad program, or they could do a course, which I think are becoming increasingly popular, where the class might learn about a given topic for some period of time. Maybe it's a week, maybe it's 2 weeks, and they actually get to go see it in person. So maybe you're learning about Roman history, and then you actually get to go see the Colosseum and go visit Rome and other parts of Italy. Could be really, really cool for students to get kind of that firsthand experience while also not requiring them to give up their housing or to give up their leadership positions in clubs, for example. So I love study abroad. I love travel, global experiences. We're not putting those down in any way, shape, or form, but just anything that staff or advisors can do to help students really make those informed choices. I think that's the key piece of the equation. So they know what they're hoping to get out of their global experience, and they're able to take that and use it to shape the rest of their lives.
This is really good. Allison, I'm going to hit you with a question that you're going to be totally unprepared, but honest answer. Right now, remind everybody, where are you sitting right now as we speak?
Yeah, so Mexico City.
Okay.
I did study abroad.
Where were you? Where did you live before how long have you been in Mexico City?
3 weeks, 4 weeks. And
okay,
before that, it was Ireland, Bulgaria, Italy, and the UK this summer.
Good. And where were you? Well, okay, the point just is, Allison, who just said, study abroad is not for everyone. She just, mentioned 5 countries, and, I think you probably left 15 out. By the way, I've been sitting here in Boston nonstop for the last 2.5 years. You all can decide who lives a more exciting life. That's for another day. Okay. So the idea just is, all right, hit me with a question, Allison.
Yeah.
By the way, everybody, we're aware of the time. We're going to go for about another 5 minutes and then turn it over to Emily.
Perfect.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll end with this one maybe. So you've been teaching at Harvard for your entire adult life, about 50 years, right, at Harvard?
Yep.
So what are your thoughts on the changing views of faculty and how they view their roles? And maybe an example from your own teaching as well, since you probably have many former students on the call.
Thank you, Allison, for asking that. I hope everybody heard her question, which is how do faculty members like me view our roles, and how have they changed over the last, I'm gonna make this up, Allison, in answer to your question, over the last 10, 15 years, in contrast to 32 years ago or whatever it was. Since I've been here a long time, I actually have a little bit of a time perspective. And there's a very clear answer. When I first was a young guy hired straight out of graduate school to teach at HGSE, it was very clear that the research part of my work was the most highly valued. Dick spent time doing a lot of research, publish. No one ever used these words, but people, what they really secretly were saying to me, try to make yourself famous. I mean, no one would say that out loud, but basically that's what they were saying. And in contrast to so many other wonderful schools, the excellent small liberal arts colleges, the Williams, the Wellesleys, the Swarthmores, the Pomonas, the Bowdens, Haverfords of the world, where research is good, but really what the core of it is paying attention to students and teaching. That has drastically changed in the last 10, 15 years. Almost every one of my faculty friends and colleagues, and certainly we focus much more on experimenting and trying to improve our teaching. And I want to give you a simple, personal, favorite example, because it's true. And I see in one of those boxes above Allison and me, I see Tom Dingman, the former dean of freshmen who stepped down just several years ago. He knows I'm not making this stuff up. Here goes. A few years ago, I taught a first-year seminar. It's called at Harvard. It's called Freshman Seminars. I think we have about 125 of them Enrollment is capped around 14 or 15, so they're small. And professors are invited to teach in them. So I taught in it. And I taught a course called something like Changing Challenges for Universities in America. Basically what we're talking about. And I had 14 terrific students, and the course went great. And I basically led discussions. I didn't lecture, I led discussions. I insisted the students talk. I cold called them, and they talked and they talked. I think there may be one or two former students logged on right now who were in that seminar. Eric, you know who you are. And the point just is simply that it went well, and it was very highly rated. So win-win. Then the year after, and this is the new Harvard, and it's the new Northwestern, and it's the new Duke, and it's the new Columbia and Penn, and so on. I tried something different. Instead of once a week for, by the way, can you hear me okay? I just want to be sure. Yes, okay, good. I'm getting strange messages that says restart required.
Oh, hold on, Dick, your volume cut out.
Can you hear me okay?
Now you're back.
All right. Somebody should jump up and down if it screws up. Here goes. I'll try to make this quick. I taught a freshman seminar the second time. This time I did something different. Instead of running a 3-hour seminar, I ran a 2.5-hour seminar. And for the last half hour, with a lot of advance notice, I chose teams of 2, a young man and a young woman. And I just paired them up and said, you're leading the last half hour of the conversation. That's your job. You know, there was an assigned reading. It was a serious course with serious readings, you know, books to read, like 7 books. And so the students led the conversation. And I immediately noticed several things, just observing. I was my same, you know, I'm the same guy. I led a 2.5. Are you waiting for me?
Yeah, you're back now.
Am I back? Okay.
You're back.
I really apologize.
It's just your audio. It's not your video.
Can you hear me or not hear me?
It's good.
Okay, I'm sorry. What can I say? I could log off, although it'll kill 5 minutes. But let me try to finish my story. If you can hear me. Yes, Allison, can you hear me? Okay. All right. Very quickly. I paired the students, and I noticed all the students talked much more, and they were really into it. And I did a little survey, and they were working way more hours to prepare. I asked one of them, you seem to be working very hard. And they all said, well, my turn will come leading the conversation. So I want everybody to be well prepared when my teammate and I lead the conversation. So I'm well prepared for everybody else. So the point just is, it was great. And about halfway through the semester, remember, I had a man and a woman, a boy and a girl leading the conversation. Halfway through, everybody had done it because we'd had 7 sessions. There were 14 students in the class, 7 men, 7 women. So I said, let's switch around the pairs. Everybody said, great, I'll meet a new person. But there was one pair, they refused to be split up. They had started to date, and they had fallen wildly in love. And they kept saying, we want to stay together. And then that's the end of the story. But you can imagine the class got a big kick out of it. Everyone enjoyed coming. They verbalized it. They said it out loud. This class is really fun. And boy, they worked their tails off. So there we are. Maybe at this point, especially if there's any microphone issue here, I hope you're hearing me loud and clear. Maybe we should approach our conclusion. Okay, Emily, may I turn it back to you? I think we said we
Yes.
12:45 and invite questions, and it's 12:45. So we're gonna, Allison, should we subside?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Well done. Well done. So as a reminder, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat where I will facilitate our Q&A. We have received a few from the start of your session. So thank you to those of you who've already submitted some questions. And I'm going to start by asking the first one. So Dick and Allison, are you ready?
Ready.
The first question, which I think probably many folks can relate to, is from Margot Dushin. I apologize if I pronounce that incorrectly. As a parent of a rising high school senior, how can a student better understand the campus culture of different colleges?
Allison, I have an answer to that, but why don't you start? But let's both be short so we can do a lot of questions. Go, and I'll be short
I
after
have a
you.
couple ideas and then you can toss them in. I think one of the things that students often don't necessarily think about, whether it's in a campus tour or if they've already chosen their campus and are doing kind of like the shopping week where you're picking classes, I think asking faculty members about how they're, like, honestly, to your point, Dick, of what you just said, how do you change your class structure or, the way things are done from year to year. So I think that really is indicative of faculty's kind of support to change and their willingness to be innovative in their teaching structure. So that's one thing I would kind of point out, and the way they take, honestly, student feedback into consideration too. I think many of us have taken the Matt Miller class on data, where you kind of write your feedback down at the end of the hour or 3 hours or whatever it is, and then he incorporates it directly into the next class session, asking faculty if they do that. I think that's really kind of, even though it's a simple thing, it really helps kind of understand the large, more cultural based emphasis on innovation.
Great. And let me put in my 2 cents worth. I've actually had this exact conversation with several, kids, sons and daughters of my neighbors where I live here, a few miles from Harvard Square. And I have a very specific answer. Obviously, to get a flavor of the culture of a campus, you should go to the information session, go on the campus tour where some kid is walking backwards around the campus. That's great. But I would do one last thing, and I'd really invest more than 2 seconds doing it. Actually, I'd do 2 more things. The first thing I would do is look at every bulletin board on campus that you can find. Just look at what the posters say. Let me give a slightly silly, extreme example, but it makes the point. If you go to Margot Dushin, if you and your son or daughter goes to a campus, unnamed campus, and you look at bulletin board after bulletin board and you see poster after poster that says meeting of the young Democrats, meeting of the young left-wing Democrats, meeting of the young moderate Democrats, meeting of the young socialists, I think you know everything you need to know about that campus. The first question I'd ask is, are Republicans welcome? I'm saying that, as a little bit of a joke. I'm sure some of you will say, I'm glad there are no Republicans. I don't feel that way. I think the best thing that can happen is when a Democrat is asked a tough question by a Republican, or when a Republican is asked a tough question by a Democrat. That's the whole point of college. But anyway, my point just is, look at the bulletin boards. Second example about bulletin boards, because this actually, when I went with my own kids, I have 2 grown daughters, this happened. One of my daughters went to a very well-known campus, not Harvard, away from Boston. And on one bulletin board after another, drama, HMS Pinafore, drama society. In other words, the students had arranged 6 different plays. On another campus, 0 plays. Well, so that means at one campus, there's a lot of drama. There are a lot of plays going on. The other campus, not so much. So the point just is, it's not that there's a secret right answer, but you ought to be able to get a flavor of that. The second thing I would say may sound trivial, but I don't think it's trivial. Last week, I visited a friend at Yale. I hopped in my car and drove to New Haven, Connecticut, 2 hours. And I got out and I was parked right next to the New Haven Green. And I saw a number of students at Yale walking on the streets. They had just moved in. They're the new first-year students. I was struck at how in almost every group of students I saw, the key word is it was a group. I saw almost no students walking alone. And I saw a lot of students walking in groups of 3 and 4 and 5, laughing, having a good time. I visited another campus recently, which obviously I'm not going to name. Everybody looked a little lonely. I'll just leave it at that. It took no effort on my part. It took like 6 minutes. And I got a clear flavor. All these kids are not faking it. They're really having a good time. End of story.
There's one other thing I just thought of, Dick. Sorry, Emily. I don't want to spend too much time on this question only, but I think my answer does kind of relate to a big piece of the book, actually a whole chapter. So I think it's really important for students who are considering their college options to speak not only with current students, like on a campus tour or during the info session, but also to alumni. So one of the things we talk about in the book is kind of this chain. We kind of had opted to change the term lifelong learning to lifelong engagement. How do you stay involved with your college far beyond graduation? I think especially now, students are thinking really critically about whether college even makes sense for them. And maybe a four-year value proposition doesn't really appeal to a student. But what if colleges could reframe that 4 years into 50 years? To say you have this relationship with your school, not only, after you throw your hat on, graduation day, but also far beyond that. So I think speaking with alumni to say, how are you still connected to your school? Do you ever, participate with other alumni? Do you ever, volunteer? Do you give back? Do you do alumni interviewing? I think that actually has a huge, that can say a lot about the current campus culture, just how alumni kind of perceive their relationship to it far beyond graduation.
Yeah, we have a lot of stuff in the book. Okay, back. Thanks, Allison. That's great. Emily, back to you.
Obviously, I love that response as well, Allison. So I'm always a proponent. And we are seeking mentors for current HGSE students. So if you need information, just email us because we'd love to have you serve as mentors for our current students. So I can give a good plug there for our own campus. Okay, the next question, we have two questions about sort of the division in society. So I'm going to combine them and you can respond to them how you wish. The one question is from Joan, and she asks, how would you deal with the issues of the college educated versus non-college educated populations? Guessing particularly around that ROI that you were just referencing to. And it's the same. And she's asking about also the issue of colleges perpetuating only liberal rather than conservative political views. So some of those college campuses have a real strong dichotomy between viewpoints.
Allison, you want to start, take a crack, and then I'm happy to add. Go ahead. If you feel
go for it. Yeah, I think, well, so to clarify the college educated versus the not college educated, in what context, I guess would be did you have a sense?
I do not have a sense.
Sorry.
Yeah. May I just, let me just try to give the straight answer, which is we don't really have any significant piece of our book looking at college educated students versus non-college educated students' return on investment. That's just not what our book's about. Our book focuses very, like a laser beam, I think. I'm happy to say that. I'm proud of it. Allison and I worked hard to really focus on, you're at a college, you're running a college, you're a student at a college, you're a staff member, you're a dean, you're a faculty member. What are 4 things you can do next month to enhance, in the good sense, the student's overall experience on that campus? So we just didn't look at return on investment. Very good question. I mean, it's, a lot of people are asking the question. And as to the liberal versus conservative, I mean, I'll just give you my opinion. Certainly, certain campuses are very heavily weighted one way or the other. I should probably just leave it at that. I don't want to say, I don't want to name a particular campus and have half the people, angry. That's not the goal. I'm also not an expert on every campus. I'll just leave it at that. How about I just say there are some campuses, I'm going to speak for Harvard College because this is where I come to work every day. The solid majority of undergraduates at Harvard College self-identify as liberal Democrats. That's just a fact. But there are a significant number of Republicans. There are significant minority, but it's more than 2 students who are pro-life rather than pro-choice. As one young, lovely woman said to me at the end of her first year, this was a couple of years ago, she said, I had a roommate. I didn't think I could live with her. I'm absolutely to my core pro-choice. My roommate assigned to me by the freshman dean's office is pro-life. I don't know how I can live with that. It cuts against my core values. My first thought was, which I did not say out loud, boy, do I feel sorry for you. My second thought, which I did say out loud to her, was, isn't that interesting? I'll bet even if you agree to disagree on that point, you're probably not going to change your mind. She's not going to change your mind. Why don't you not try? Why don't you enjoy one another's company on the 200 other topics that you might share in common? The love of a certain book, a certain play, history, learning French. I mean, whatever it may be. That spring, this I really liked her a lot. This young woman came back to see me. Professor Light, I've had a great first year. To which I said, how nice. Listen, whatever happened to that roommate you were so agitated about? And she said, oh, we're going to live together again next year. She's become one of my best friends. I said, what happened? And she smiled, and she knew what I meant. And she simply said, I think I just grew up. That's my answer. Excuse me, I left out the punchline. The punchline, she concluded our discussion by saying, she pushed me with a lot of hard questions. I didn't change my mind. I'm still 100% firmly pro-choice. But for the first time in my life, I really understand why I believe what I believe, because I was pushed by someone who strongly disagrees with me and who I like.
Thank you, Dick. That was a great response.
Leave out that punchline. Okay, go ahead.
We have two more questions. So it is 12:58 here on the East Coast. If you have to leave us, please feel free to do so. But if you can stick around, we'll go to two more questions and then we'll wrap up. All right. The first question I'm going to ask also applies to HGSE in some ways. So Ye is asking, I teach in a commuting university. Most of the students, as in 4 out of 5 in this graduate program, are part-timers. What would you recommend based on your research to build close relationships and to invest meaningfully in order to harvest? And I would also add my own question about online students. So part-timers and online students, how do they take care to really harvest those experiences and invest?
Allison, ladies first, go for it.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, like we said, a lot of the suggestions in our book do apply a lot to residential students, but a lot can be applied or can be kind of shifted thoughtfully to apply to anybody. And I think one of those is that we really emphasize, like Dick was saying, getting to know faculty members, but I think from the faculty side, giving students the opportunities to do so. So whether that's having open office hours virtually or in person, inviting them and kind of priming, especially first year students, to say, look, you don't necessarily have to have a question on the material that we've covered in class today. If you do, great. If not, just come and talk about something that you're interested in or something, in my own career journey that you're interested in. I think kind of opening the door to those relationships is really important because students often might think that they're wasting their time or that they're, maybe not open to that conversation. I remember a professor I had in college, everyone in the class was a senior, everyone was stressed about jobs. And she had told us about she actually graduated from Harvard and didn't get a job offer right away, which is like the worst thing you can imagine for a Harvard student who has, a lot of family members being like, hey, what are you doing after graduation? To not have an answer is makes you feel horrible. And we were all kind of experiencing that exact same thing our second semester senior year. And so just by kind of hearing about what she had deemed a failure in that moment, but seeing how happy she was in the job she had ultimately, what she was working in as a professor at Penn, it really just kind of reinforced that it was all going to be okay for us. And I think her kind of opening that door to say, here's something kind of vulnerable about my own experience, whether you offer something that personal or not, just kind of offering that up to students, showing them that humanity, whether they're on campus full-time or they're a commuter or they're part-time. I think that's something that just goes back to that personal relationship component and can be really, beneficial to all sorts of different kinds of students.
I'm just going to build on what Allison said with a very short point, but for me, it's one of the biggest points I can make. I think keeping the question in mind, Emily, about commuting students or part-time students or online students. I think one of the most underestimated items of the overall college experience, whether it's residential or commuting, part-time or full-time, in-person or online. One of the most underestimated features of a good education is getting good advising. There's no reason that a part-time student at, some part-time college in Florida, commuting, maybe even has children, a family, spouse, partner, whatever it may be. There's no reason that that person should not have good advising. Every college and university should try to have good advising. And here's my one bit of wisdom that I can share. Each of you can make of it what you wish. And that's simply, it seems to me that for every student, sometimes they want an advisor for a reason. Sometimes they want an advisor for a season. And sometimes they want an advisor forever. And if you're wondering what in the world does Dick mean by that, I can tell you exactly. It's not meant to be a mystery. Imagine a first year, I'm going to use Harvard, but I mean, it applies to a part-time commuting student. What courses should I take my first year? Well, that's when you need an advisor for a reason. You've got a specific problem. I need someone to help me think it through. Now, an advisor for a season might be more, someone is supervising a long-term paper that you're writing in economics or history or sociology or, biology or whatever it may be. So you want an advisor for a little longer. That's a season. Thesis advisors at Harvard College would probably be called an advisor for a season because they don't just answer one question. They're with a student for a year or more. And then finally, there's an advisor for a lifetime. And that's literally someone who gives life advice. You know who's really good at that? To my surprise, and that is coaches, athletic coaches and assistant coaches. They model behavior for students. Come on time, make eye contact. You're working with teammates. Be a good teammate, be a good sport, help others succeed. We're all in this together. We want to win the game together when we compete against that other university. So my point is, getting good advising is an important thing, and you can get it online. You can get it if you're a part-time student. I taught my 2 classes at HGSE online last year, among 100 other people did too. And the idea just is, I spend an enormous amount of time on Zoom advising students. Happy to do it. I don't know if they all took my advice. Who knows? I'll never know. But anyway, advising is a big deal. Last question, Emily, go ahead.
All right, last question. And we're circling back to kind of where we started the conversation, where you gave that great example of the students coming together to create their own course. What would be your advice for the universities and colleges that have less financial resources? Where should they really put their money? Maybe one answer is advising, but what else?
Allison, go ahead.
I think so that we have a chapter about, and Dick had alluded to it earlier, but really listening to students. I think where there's some resources to be put, whether that's a large amount or a small amount, really getting that student input into where those resources should be allocated. Students know what they're looking for. They know what they need. Pull together, a group of maybe a couple 4th years, 3rd years, even maybe some 1st years could know, what already exists, what doesn't. But that would be my suggestion, kind of take the students' feedback into consideration.
I'll expand a little bit on what Allison said with a little bit of a tweak or a twist. And that's, my suggestion would be to invest the little bit of money that a campus has, even if it's very, very little, into doing a little bit of incredibly simple research about the student experience, the overall student experience now on campus. How much would it cost any college or university, Campus X, how much would it cost to ask a small sample? I mean, like 30 or 40, I don't mean 1,000, 30 or 40 students, just one-on-one, the way we're all talking right now, or the way at least some, Allison and I are talking right now. Just ask a student, what's the best bit of advice at the end of first year, at the end of the so-called freshman year, what's the best bit of advice you got this year? Now, some students may not think of something, but most will say, oh, the most helpful advice was get to know a faculty member, or whatever they say. Second question, you're looking at that same student. It's now the end of your first year. What advice do you wish someone had given you that no one did? I tried that, and I got a lot of very good answers. Here's the point. If students repeatedly come up with something, meaning, I wish someone had told me to do X, well, then change the advising system. Tell students to do X. The students themselves are saying, I wish someone had told me. When a large fraction of students tell you something, take them seriously. Put another way, I'm now going to conclude and just say, you know, we all talk about treating students with honor. We all talk about treating students with great respect. What better way to treat students with respect than to ask them about their experience now, get some answers, take their answers seriously, and implement some changes to enhance the overall quality of the college experience. That doesn't cost a lot of money for me to sit with a student for 8 minutes and say, what's the best bit of advice you got? And what do you wish you had known more about? How expensive is that? It's basically very little. On that note, Emily, should we not snatch defeat from the jaws of victory? What do you think?
You did wonderful, both of you. Thank you so much, Allison. Thank you, Dick. Do you have any final words that you want to share with our audience, those that remain?
I'm good. Allison, do you have a benediction, closing thoughts?
Just to say thank you both to the audience and to you, Emily. This has really been a pleasure. Dick and I don't get to collaborate all that much anymore now that the writing process is over. So really appreciate this opportunity to chat, albeit, you know, via the chat.
And I'll really close it up by saying you all can see why I was so happy working and collaborating with Allison Jegla. It's a treat. It's a treat.
Likewise.
Anyway, bye everyone. Enjoy the rest of your